Hey everybody, this is Ken. You know me as the Modern Samurai, THEMDRN Samurai, and you are on Herdwatching, my sort of political social media commentary tools and techniques video blog. Go see the first video if you're sort of curious about what this is about and why I'm doing it. Now, one of the things that somebody asked me to talk about when we were getting ideas together for what videos to start with was to talk about the Electoral College. Now, I'm not going to talk about the techniques. There's a PragerU University video on the Electoral College that is dead perfect and explaining to you not only what the Electoral College is, but a lot about why the framers created the Electoral College. And I don't intend to run over the same ground. I'll put a link to the video in the description, or you can just search it on a search engine and you'll find it. But I did want to talk to you about why I agree with the Electoral College concept, and that is very easy. I think geographic concentrations of people tend to lead to a monolithic thought culture, and that's not something I think is both equitable or even helpful and effective. Monocultures are not resilient cultures. They're not great. Diversity is a good thing if you want to take one of the slogans of the left. And that includes intellectual diversity. And if small pockets of highly concentrated populations were able to impose their will simply by a 51% popular vote on the entire rest of the nation, regardless of its geographic location, regardless of how geography affects culture, and the way people live their lives and the things that make sense for them and the way they live, that's not a great thing. We can take an extreme example, obviously an imperfect one. Imagine that New York City has an enormous population, which it does, but let's pretend that New York City had 51% of the voters in America in it. And somebody runs a campaign in New York City and decides that everybody who has to walk up a 4-4 walk up to their apartment, they hate that. So they pass a law or elect someone who's going to pass a law that says if you're renting an apartment, the landlord has to provide you with an elevator to get to your apartment. And there's just no way around that, and that's an absolute requirement. And then, so out in, the middle of nowhere in Wisconsin, there's somebody who has a 2-story farmhouse and they have a spare bedroom, and they decide to rent that bedroom to a lodger who's, coming into town for a little while. It doesn't make sense. It would not make sense for that person in that farmhouse in the middle of Wisconsin to have to build an elevator because they're technically renting an apartment. And that would be it. Like, the people in Wisconsin would constantly be dealing with the laws that were applicable for people who lived in New York, for instance. Now, obviously, housing laws are not passed at the federal level, and I get it. You can pull the analogy apart, but you understand what we're saying here, that the things that make sense to the tight cluster of people that live in a big city in one place are not necessarily the things that make sense for someone anywhere else. And the framers were incredibly aware of this idea that pure population, pure popular votes leave vast geographic and cultural segments of the nation at the mercy of the mob, what they thought of as the mob. And it was a bad idea. And it is a bad idea. So we don't have one popular election for our nation. We have 51 popular votes where, the majority rules, but we've broken our nation into areas that we consider to be worth considering as one population. Now, even within that, you could make arguments. Pennsylvania is basically driven by Philadelphia, for instance. And that's, probably problematic, but there's a limit to how much resolution and micro-slicing you're going to make happen that way. In any case, I don't support the idea of a pure representational 51% or 50.001% of the popular vote deciding everything about our nation on a federal level. I think it misses critical bits of bringing in other thoughts and other ideas, and would leave vast segments of the population at the mercy of anyone who could get the most people together. And if there's one thing for you to take away from this, it's that I agree with the founders that the purpose of government is not to let 50.001% of the people in the world impose their will on the others. That's not freedom. Freedom is limiting the ability of 50.001% of the people to impose their will on the other 49. Our system protects the smaller populations. It protects diversity of thought. It protects different ideas. It prevents mob rule from simply homogenizing the culture. And that is good. Now, at this time, if you're on the left, that didn't come out the way you wanted it to, and you feel bad about that. But on the flip side, there were an enormous amount of times when this exact balance, giving power to the minority group, resulted in massive freedom upgrades, resulted in massive liberation events that you are probably really happy about. That would have never happened if 51% of the people were enough to keep our culture in stasis forever. I just want you guys to think about that. If you're unhappy with the way it came out, you have my sympathy as long as you're being rational about it. But there's a reason for this. And you know what? If it turns out that, the moderates are now going to be in charge for a while, the system will now protect you and give you a reasonable chance to strike back at us if we get overconfident and start forgetting about big sections of the population. Anyway, go watch the PragerU video. The Electoral College is a good thing. The concept is a good thing. And this idea of protection of the smaller groups from the imposition of the will of the larger group, there's value there. And you should probably be thinking about that. Anyway, we'll be talking again. Have a great one, and I'll catch you next video.